Oh, you're here. Mr. President, thank you very much. Mr. President, it's been a long day and I stand to close the debate. But I want to start by thanking the drafting team at the Office of the Chief Parliamentary Counsel. I want to especially thank Ms. Samantha Eaton for being here and all the work she has done on this bill. I also want to thank the attorneys from the Cabinet Office of Jamaica. I want to thank Ms. Caldwell. I want to thank Mr. Carr also. And I'm very happy that they're here with us today and have been able to support us. Mr. President, Jamaicans have been tuned into this debate in both places. And I'm very happy today that some of our young people were here. And I see some have stayed until the end. It says a lot about our young people. They're young people who are very interested. Earlier today, we had some students from UE, UTech, CMU, JUTS. We had some members from G2K and Young Jamaica here also. And I know the students up there from UTech, I know that they're very good students. And Mr. President, since I have the floor, I want to just tell you that routinely the Student Council of UTech sends me documents on policies and bills we're debating to give their contribution to this. And so I'm very happy that they are here. Also want to acknowledge the members of civil society who stuck it out, Jeanette. Thank you for sticking it out with us today, who are here. There were others earlier, but she's the last woman standing. And so thanks to civil society for that. Our Jamaicans, and especially our young people, understand that this bill is about one thing. It's about whether Jamaica, after one of the most devastating natural disasters in our history, will rebuild slowly, painfully, fragmented, or whether we'll rebuild with urgency, coordination, accountability, and purpose. Mr. President, I believe that people have a sense of the task at hand. I want to thank all Jamaicans who have participated in this debate through their tweets, their posts, their articles, their reports. Our democracy is alive and well. And so I thank all of them. I want to thank those who contributed today on both sides of the aisle. A lot of work went into preparing your statements, and I want to thank you for that. I sat here today listening to everybody on both sides and taking notes, and hopefully I will get that same respect back as I close the debate. Mr. President, please be reminded that the damage and losses have been estimated at approximately 1.952 trillion Jamaican dollars. Trillion. And that represents more than half of Jamaica's 2024 GDP. Homes were destroyed, schools were destroyed, roads were cut off, farms were completely flattened, water systems, health facilities, churches, public buildings, livelihoods, and whole communities were upended. Ordinary systems were not built for extraordinary devastation. Right. And I repeat that. Ordinary systems were not built for extraordinary devastation. And our systems, despite all the work we put into them, we both agreed does not move quickly enough. And this is an extraordinary devastation that we've been facing. A catastrophe of this scale cannot be managed by scattered approvals, disconnected agencies, and business as usual timelines. Mr. President, every government in an emergency must manage a delicate balance. Move too slowly and the people suffer. Move without safeguards and public trust withers away. This is the dichotomy before governments. That is the balance that this bill seeks to strike. I agree with you. And as I speak to members of civil society and other groups who call and want to have a conversation, that's where I take the conversation. What's the right balance? We want to have speed, but we also want to have accountability. And it's really weighing the two things. And so I move the conversation from the emotions to really having a conversation about what's that right balance. And I think different people have different answers in relation to what that balance should be. The key clauses of this bill are designed to achieve exactly balance. Clause 4 gives Narra the authority to coordinate, implement, monitor, and fast-track reconstruction and resilience projects. Because after a disaster of this scale, no country can afford a maze of disconnected agencies moving at different speeds. But that speed, Mr. President, is not in any way unchecked. Mr. President, clauses 17 to 20 require approved programs and plans, performance indicators, monitoring systems, and a public register of reconstruction and resilience projects. In other words, Narra is empowered to move quickly, but it must move according to approved plans, measurable standards, and information that the public can inspect. The step-in powers are another example of this balance, and it's one that we have a lot of conversations about. Clauses 21 to 24 allow Narra to intervene where approvals are delayed or where an approving entity fails to act within the required timeline. That is the speed mechanism. But the accountability mechanism is also built into the same process. Narra must notify the approving entity, obtain independent expert advice, satisfy itself that the relevant requirements have been met or exceeded before even applying to the minister for a step-in order. The minister must then also be satisfied before issuing a step-in order. So this is not arbitrary power, quite the contrary. The provisions that grant Narra the speed to act are structured, lawful tools to prevent paralysis. Technical review, written reasons, ministerial responsibility, and public accountability are all preserved in this bill. Some people speak as though accountability and effectiveness are enemies. They're not. Properly designed, accountability is what makes speed credible. And speed is what makes accountability meaningful in a crisis. So the National Reconstruction and Resilience Authority strikes the right balance in our view. And that's what I want my young people to think about when they're thinking about this bill. And you're going to be confronted with things when you become leaders. And I know you want to be leaders in this country. And that's why you're here tonight. But that's what you're going to have to balance. And there's not going to be a right answer. But you have to think, okay, I want to be fast, but I also want to be accountable to my people. What's the right level of layer? Someone may say it needs 6 layers. Someone may say it needs 10. You have to satisfy yourself that you have achieved speed and accountability. In my opening, Mr. President, I spoke to the international experience and how some of them got it right. But we also, again, Mr. President, have our own case study right here at home, Mr. President. And it is important that we know what the last administration did when they were facing extreme devastation. Our former Prime Minister, the Most Honorable P.J. Patterson, after Hurricane Ivan, established the Office of National Reconstruction, ONR. It was established as a special unit to coordinate relief and reconstruction rather than relying on the ordinary machinery of government. Speed was his focus. The Patterson administration did not prepare an act of parliament with clear procedures to establish, like we have done. Just do it. That administration understood, and they chose speed. We have decided to choose speed, but add other layers of accountability. And there's a lot more I can say at ONR, but I won't go there. But I'm going to go into some of the questions. And I saw a WhatsApp notice that was mobilizing elements of our society to attend today's debate. I'd actually expected a lot more of them today. And it's a good thing to have people here. And it had 4 items in it, that ad. And I'll cover some of those 4, plus I'm going to add some, because remember, I was listening to everybody and some of the issues kind of collapsed together. So I'm going to go through them. In that ad, they asked, who controls the spending? That's what they wanted to hear from the debate today. Who is controlling the spending? And it's really simple. Spending remains within the public finance framework. Parliament approves the national budget. Parliament holds the purse. I can't spend anything that's not in the big yellow book. That remains the same. Jamaica's constitution, the supreme law of the land, is clear and cannot be superseded. Nothing gets spent without an allocation from Parliament. Next, Cabinet approves the reconstruction and resilience projects. The Minister's responsibility for Narra provides policy oversight. The CEO is accountable for execution. The accounts of Narra's activities must be kept. The accounts must be audited by an external auditor, not appointed by the management of the entity. The Auditor General is explicitly invited to conduct audits of Narra. And finally, reports must come to Parliament. The answer to the question of control, if you wish to call it that, starts with the public approved by Parliament. Spending is controlled by law, and that cascades into cabinet approval, ministerial oversight, financial rules, audit requirements, both internal and external audits, and strong parliamentary scrutiny. The other question I saw was, what safeguards ensure transparency? How will citizens access information? Valid question. So if we think about it, Mr. President, these safeguards are clear and very important in the Act. There will be a public electronic register of approved reconstruction and resilience projects. So that's a public electronic register. It's going to be online. There will be reporting requirements. There will be audited financial statements. There will be parliamentary accountability. There will be performance indicators. There will be oversight from the minister. There will be an independent public oversight. There will be independent public oversight through JAMROC, modeled on the EPOC approach that helped Jamaica maintain credibility during our economic reform program. Mr. President, this is not my rhetoric. These are the safeguards laid out in the very bill that we are debating. Clause 20, which provides for a register of approved reconstruction and resilience projects to be kept and periodically updated. And I need to quote 22, so clause 2. The register shall be made available electronically for public inspection. It's in there. Clause 10 requires Narra to furnish the minister with reports, returns, accounts, and other information on its activities. And clause 11 requires annual reports and audited financial statements to be submitted to the minister and laid in both houses of Parliament. Clause 9 requires proper accounts and annual audits and expressly allows the Auditor General to examine Narra's accounts and records. JAMROC's public oversight and routine reporting will bring another dimension of transparency. With all that said, Mr. President, I have to point out that reconstruction is a national project, and we do not see reconstruction as some private project of the government. It is not, Mr. President, and that's why every project needs to be known to all of Jamaica. The administration at every step of the way has sought to engage the public and all parts of society. 20 amendments were taken in the other place. And the reason those amendments were taken was because we were listening. I can tell you, I listened to the whole debate. I took my own notes. Others took their notes. And there were things that were said that you said, yes, actually, you're very right on that one. And amendments were taken. Where we saw misunderstanding and misconceptions, we have also responded in good faith with accurate information. We've been trying to put out information. Our objective is, and always has been, to make oversight of Narra and its activities public and independent on those foundations, and on those foundations credible. The people of Jamaica must be able to see what is being done, where it is being done, who is responsible, what it costs, and whether it is being delivered on time. I'm going to deviate to another question. Why is there no purpose in the act? I've seen that from civil society. I've seen it here. And as you heard earlier, that's not novel. I think Senator Fitzhenley would have noted that. But let me give you some bills, because I think Jamaica needs to understand that it's not unusual. There is the Offences Against a Person Act, originally from 1864. It proceeds directly into provisions on homicide, murder, assaults, etc., without a separate objects or purpose clause. It starts with this act may be cited as the Offences Against a Person Act. There's also the Larceny Act, which does similarly. The Evidence Act. Amendment Act 2020. Similar. Wildlife Protection Amendment 25. Short title, this act may be cited as the Wildlife Protection Amendment Act 2025 and shall be read and construed as one with the Wildlife Protection Act. And it focuses on specific amendments. And then you also have some other acts. I had asked the legal team to send through examples of different acts where you have the purpose that is missing. And so that's not unique. Some of the concerns, Mr. President, have been raised have been really about challenging executive power. You felt that as a subtext of a lot of the arguments. But I'd like to remind all of Jamaica that executive power, like every other power in the Constitution, is legitimate authority granted by the Constitution. What we see in law is a manifesto of that original or manifestation of that original authority. Law enforcement, administrative action, all of that flows from executive power. And cabinet is the custodian of the executive authority. The cabinet is enshrined in our Constitution. And it is in fact the principal instrument of policy, read section 69, and is responsible for the control of the direction of government. Cabinet is not some nebulous gathering. The cabinet is the highest level of leadership in government. The buck stops at cabinet. The accountability that cabinet allows is unparalleled. It is therefore good that so much of Narra's activities are approved by this body called cabinet, as this is precisely what would be required for a crisis of this magnitude. The other question that has come up in different ways is the lack of a sunset clause. And guess what? I had a similar question. And I had to go to the legal team. Why we don't just write that it ends in 5 years' time? Because that's what the intent is. And the Prime Minister has said he sees this as a 5-year project. And I kept saying, so that we just write it into the bill. And they were able to explain to me that the bill contains a dissolution framework in Part 4. Clause 29 provides for dissolution of the authority. Clauses 30 to 33 provide for savings of agreements, transfer of money, devolution of assets and liabilities, and transfer of official records. Clause 35 states that the act continues in force only until the day after the day of dissolution. So, before the act can cease to be in force, Narra has to be wound up. Narra is going to have assets, so it has to be wound up. The transitional arrangements in Part 4 achieve that. Part 4 gives effect to the winding up of the authority. And they've taken a lot of time explaining to me that if we had included 4 or 5 year period, for example, at the end of the period, the authority would cease to exist on that exact date. And that would not facilitate the transition that winding up of the authority provides under Part 4. Indeed. I heard a lovely question, and I note that Senator Professor Morris isn't here. He had brought up persons with disabilities, and it's one that I always agree with him on. It's a passion of mine, persons with disabilities or special needs. And in the education rebuild that we're doing, we're actually building in that element. So we're building ramps, chairlifts, et al. And I think it's important that we do have that conversation around how we better incorporate. And I know Senator Sinclair has noted that in the Disabilities Act, it is a requirement for commercial buildings to have these accommodations in place. And so that will be done. And I know from the schools, we are actually doing so right now. There was a question about land tenure, which is a very good one. And I think when you talk to a lot of people in Westmoreland, that question comes up a lot, and especially right after the hurricane. We'll be approaching, and I'm going to quote from the Prime Minister. This is what he said. We will approach the problem in Westmoreland with the necessary sensitivity and passion to ensure that every citizen of Jamaica, thank you, has a fair chance, a fair opportunity to get access to land. That was what our Prime Minister said. I'm going to send it to you. The objective of the government is to give, this is another quote, the objective of the government is to give you ownership of land that is secure, land that can be lived on in a sustainable way, and land that forms part of the planned area of the government. And he was speaking in relation to the hurricane. So the Prime Minister has made a commitment. And one of the things about us with commitments is that we have a track record of carrying out our commitments. You saw it in the lovely achievements booklet. So after all, when it comes to land titles, the Andrew Holness-led administration has delivered. The ministry led by the Prime Minister has advanced land tenure security through the issuance of more than 23,400 land titles under the National Land Titling Program, with more than half of them issued between 2021 and 2025 under the new systematic land titling system. So when the Prime Minister says this is a priority in Westmoreland, for example, it is already a priority of this government, and we're going to extend the work that we're doing there. I won't go into the disclosures because I know that was dealt with before. There was a question about PIMS, and I'll get to that a little bit later. Just going back through the questions and just picking up the main ones, Mr. President. All right, there was one that I got yesterday, and everybody is sending in their comments, which is a good thing. And I think the umbrella group of churches sent in theirs. And they were asking what assurance can be given that affected communities will still have meaningful access to due process, environmental protection, and judicial review. Narra acts on legal processes. Clause 17.4 requires Narra in developing and monitoring projects, programs, and plans to hold consultations with persons affected or likely to be affected by a project. And our team has said that multiple times. Clause 18.1a requires programs to be developed in consultation with relevant persons. And Clause 19.1a requires plans to be prepared in consultation with relevant persons. That is consultation. Obviously, that's consultation. And so it is in the bill. On environmental protection, Clause 19.3 requires project development to prioritize climate and disaster resilience. Vulnerable areas and solutions informed by wind, rainfall, groundwater flow, surface water flow, and natural hazard impacts. So the environment is expressly discussed in the bill. Mr. President, judicial review is guaranteed under the Constitution. This bill or any other ordinary piece of legislation passed by the Parliament can never supersede the protections in the Constitution. So nothing in this bill expressly removes the supervisory jurisdiction of the courts. Nothing in this bill could. Why fast-tracked this authority. Why are we fast tracking it? Why are we moving so quickly? Because delay means a child remains out of a proper classroom. Delay means a farmer cannot get produce to market. Delay means a family remains in unsafe housing. Delay means a community remains cut off when heavy rains come. Delay means workers lose opportunities. Delays ultimately means Jamaica pays more for the same project later. Earlier, I spoke to that balance of effectiveness and efficiency. That balance applies here as well. No one in this debate has said, let's delay Narra on its work. No one has put it that way, Mr. President. Instead, what you've heard is, we need to do a joint select, or maybe we should add this additional layer. But doing so does have implicit trade-off. What the government does or does not do has consequences. And I'm going to just speak quickly. There are so many points that had been raised. Some have already been answered. There was a question about Clause 7, and I think that was from you, Senator Scott Motley, on access, on whether or not that committee meant the Jamrock. But it could be any committee. It could be a committee that's looking at how we do more for persons with disability and so on. You also raised the issue of the fence and Nago Head and how Narra would treat with it. I just want to note that when you made your statement, I asked the PS to send over the file of all of the correspondence. I know nobody spoke about the letter that I wrote to the municipality begging them to do the approval and that they've never responded to me. That's a part of here. I have all of the correspondence here. And there is one piece, the issue in terms of land title, it's owned by NLA, the National Land Agency. And there was a church on the property, and that was agreed a year ago. But I get the approval now. So I'm putting that on the table, and I'd love for you to look. I'd love for you to look at it. I don't speak out of turn ever. So I want you to look. And there's another piece of documentation that I have here that I've not gone into. And I think when you both look at it, you're going to be very amazed that no one has said that part to you. But I don't get political here. All right, so the next one was in relation to auditors. And I know that Senator Tomlinson had raised some issues, and he had said that he had an issue with the auditor being chosen by the cabinet secretary, who already reports to the prime minister. But if you think about it, think about NHT, for example. The board of NHT appoints the auditor. Who appoints the board? The minister. So that argument really doesn't follow. It doesn't follow. If you look at PIMS, I'll tell you my experience with PIMS has shown that and yours too. I am in PIMC. And so I've seen projects delayed for years that have so much impact in our country. But Mr. President, as my time is running out, I don't even know how much time I have. Prime Minister, Dr. the Most Honorable Andrew Holness's 2026 budget presentation was very clear about the development and reconstruction agenda. The government he leads is not talking about a patchwork of projects. We have outlined and programmed the rebuilding of Black River better and more resilient than what existed before. We're talking about the Hopewell and Lucy bypass and the Lucy Harbor development. Hanover will become a world-class town. Plans are underway for Montego Bay's revitalization. Falmouth as a model for climate-resilient coastal communities. The North-South Highway extension, Port Antonio reimagined, the St. Thomas Port and the Port of Kingston as the region's premier logistics hub. Provisions have been made for a new Kingston Public Hospital to be built to modern international standards with resilience, continuity of care, and disaster readiness embedded at its core. We're even talking about Vernon Field Light. We know what's the problem with having both of our international airports on the coast. We'll build roads that ensure that communities aren't isolated when disasters strike. New housing across St. Catherine, Trelawney, Manchester, Clarendon, Westmoreland, St. Thomas, St. Mary, all over the country. Mr. President, that's the scale of the ambition. That is why normal project by project, agency by agency, form by form approach will not be enough. And you asked about PIMC, even in my example with Nago Head, we could have just met. That issue of convening where we all meet really quickly. That's really what I think the lesson is. And that's what Narra provides, where we can all just sit together. If there's an issue with ownership, we solve it quickly. If there's an issue with something else, the municipality may want the land too. We sit and we talk about it. But it is important that we move forward. But equally, Mr. President, what is the value of moving fast if the public cannot see what is happening? What's the value of execution if it's not transparent? What's the value of delivery if it does not command public confidence? The answer is that it's not about speed alone. And the answer is that it's not about process alone either. The answer is disciplined speed, urgent delivery with clear safeguards, execution with audits, and flexibility with public reporting. The answer, Mr. President, is really what we have put in this bill. Mr. President, earlier this week, I was in Westmoreland again, and I felt like I hadn't been there in a while because it had been some weeks. I have to go there periodically where we've had the damage because I have so many schools in the area that are damaged, and I get to see the lay of the land. I'm there a lot, and I get heartbroken every time I go and I see what has happened, and especially for me, especially seeing the churches that are such an important part of our communities, seeing them in the state that they are. There was a book that came out last year that had beautiful images of the churches across Jamaica. And it's been heartbreaking to go and see the devastation to them. And then you see the schools and you see what my teachers are living in and working in. I had a teacher, and this week was Teachers Day, and I want to salute all our teachers in this country. I had a teacher say to me when I asked her, how are things? She said, I lost everything and I'm just catching somewhere. That was hard for her to say to me, but that was her reality. And her school is damaged, it's leaking, there are problems there. So at home, she's catching somewhere. At school, she's in not the best of conditions. It's those people, Mr. President, that we have to figure out what's that right balance between speed and accountability. And Mr. President, I believe that Narra provides that balance. And so as I bring this debate to a close, I invite my colleagues to ensure its expedited approval through all its remaining stages. And Mr. President, I ask that the bill be read a second time.
Thank you, Minister. The question is that the bill be read for a second time. Those in favor? Against?
A bill entitled An Act to Make Provision for the Management and Implementation of the Post-Disaster Reconstruction and Resilience Efforts consequent on the passage of Hurricane Melissa and for resilience generally, to establish the National Reconstruction and Resilience Authority, and for connected matters read a second time.
Thank you. The Senate will now resolve itself into a committee of the whole Senate to consider the bill clause by clause. I know that there were some, Senator Tomlinson, there were some amendments. You should give them to me in writing if you have them ready, please. Come again? I know you're going to speak to some of them, but I need the written. Copies of the proposed amendment on which notice has not been given shall be handed to the chairman in writing. That's all I'm saying. It's just to speed up the process. I'm not trying to trick you, Okay. I'm going to put Clause 1. Those in favor? Against? Eh? The ayes have it. I put clause 2. Those in favor? Against? Ayes have it. I put clause 3. Those in favor?
I had raised a question around 3.2. I don't know. I apologize to the minister if she addressed it. I had an emergency call and I left the room for a short while you were speaking, where the provisions of the schedule shall have effect as to the Constitution and procedure of the authority and otherwise in relation hereto. And I was saying, but there's no schedule. So I don't know if I'm mistaken because I gather that some people over here can't read too and understand too well. So if you could just explain to me whether I'm misconstruing it. 3.2. The only schedule I see, Minister, is that relating to the CEO.
That's correct. There's only one schedule that's there.
So what are you, should this be there then? Because it refers to, if you read it, it steers to the Constitution.